Welcome to Backroom Talk.
Unilateral and bilateral training today, so we're going real fitnessy. Bilateral or unilateral, what is going to be better? Could each have some utility depending on who's in front of us?
Because if we're saying we have a discrepancy somewhere, when we start tearing layers apart, it only makes sense to do one side at a time.
To listen to more Backroom Talk, be sure to subscribe. Learn to design personalized programs with the OPEX system of coaching by heading to opexfit.com.
All right, guys. Welcome to another episode of Backroom Talk. We may be really awkward and rusty today because we had a couple weeks of vacation, so we haven't actually recorded an episode in a while.
Yeah, you didn't even have to tell them that. They would have never noticed because we've been dropping episodes.
I know.
But I like the honesty, though. That's good, yeah.
I feel like I had to be upfront because, again, if we're super weird and can't hold a conversation, then I think it's best that people know.
Well, they're just going to be like, what the hell is the difference? That's how they always are. Super weird and can't hold a conversation.
Well, before we get into, I know you have an article to share, and we're going to be talking about unilateral and bilateral training today. So we're going real fitnessy.
Yep.
I just want to take 10 seconds, guys, to let you know that when this episode has dropped, we will have just opened enrollment for our October CCP cohort. So I know there's a lot of people listening, and some of you guys have probably thought about, this coaching certificate program thing that we offer, that James and Carl teach. And so now would be a really good time to actually get a little info in that. Go ahead onto our website, opexfit.com. Just go hit that CCP button up the top, apply, schedule a call, and we can have a chat about it. Just want to give that a little shout out. Yeah,
and if you sign up, I will send you a personalized letter and a book.
I was actually thinking about what I could sweeten the deal with. If you mention that you listen to Backroom Talk and you sign up for the next cohort, Carl will send you X, but I didn't get any further than that.
His underwear.
That's only
weird.
dirty ones,
Is that
right?
Weird?
All right, let's move on from that.
Okay.
Hopefully we see a few people in CCP.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's talk about this article.
Yeah, so this is something that's been extremely interesting to me almost forever, to be honest with you, and I'll explain why. But let me just read the lead into this article, and then I'll give you some context. And like we were talking about before we press record, I think it's going to be interesting to get your take on this because you're so far removed from NCAA sports and the craziness that is college sports in the United States. So just really quick, so article starts off, so this is an NPR article. Will we link it?
We will, yes.
Okay, cool. So starts off, a new era in college sports begins this week following Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear's executive order allowing college athletes to be compensated for their use of their name, image, and likeness, known by its abbreviation NIL. At least 7 states will put this into effect. NIL laws on Thursday. The law allows athletes to make money for things like endorsement deals, signing autographs, and social media content. That's been prohibited under NCAA rules, but now the organization is in the process of reforming those rules. So overall, what this means is if a college athlete, basketball player, baseball player, volleyball player, whatever sport it is, someone goes to school, a university, to play a sport, there have been very, very tight rules that, and the NCAA has always called this amateurism. So they're saying because you're not a professional athlete, you cannot get paid for playing this sport by the university, which still holds true, as well as you cannot get paid by using your name, your image, and your likeness. For example, let's say that I'm a college football player and I'm very, very good and people want my autograph. I can't go and sign autographs and get paid for it because that's against NCAA laws because I'm an amateur. I'm not a professional athlete. But the NCAA is making billions and billions and billions of dollars off of my name, image, and likeness with TV deals, selling jerseys, being in video games, the whole nine. So this rule removes that. So it says, hey, it's fucking open season. You now have 18-year-old athletes that are able to, and we're talking someone comes in, they're like the number 1 rated basketball or football player in the country. Those people are very famous, very, very famous, not only in their universities, but in NFL or scouts' eyes and fans' eyes as well. Everyone wants that player on their team, so everyone knows who they are. So now it's open season. Those people can now sign agents. Those people can now sign endorsement deals. those students can now go to the local car dealership and say like, hey, I'll put my face on this billboard if you give me $500,000 a year. And that will be done. It's already being done. So this happened last Thursday. By Friday, there were hundreds of athletes posting their brands on social media. There was, you know, Master P is?
No. Sorry.
Make them say, no.
That sounds familiar. But,
Yeah.
But...
So Master P, it was before your time in the United States. He was
Okay.
a very, very famous rapper from New Orleans.
Okay.
So he was part of the Cash Money Millionaires.
Okay.
Big timers, all those guys. But anyway, his son is a college basketball player. I believe he goes to Tennessee, or he just signed to go to Tennessee. That kid signed a $2 million deal this weekend with some web company to just endorse them, right? So it's like, you know, it's like the world of VA firms right now, right? Or VC firms right now, and they're just like throwing money all over the place. So now these kids that are just enrolling in college are getting $1 million deals, or in his case, $2 million deals to endorse these products or just to wear the logo. And there's like, have you heard of Barstool Sports?
Yes.
So Barstool Sports, if you look at their Instagram, they have like swipables of like dozens of athletes that they've already signed, and they're not going after the person I just talked about, like the number one ranked recruit, blah blah blah. They're going after very attractive athletes or athletes with influence. So they're looking at like female volleyball players to wear like, you know, Barstool sports bras like under their uniforms, or like if they're in like some rec beach volleyball, and they're paying them money to do this. So they're going after influence. This is just going to be insane, and the ramifications of this is going to be extremely interesting to watch. First, let me get your take on, what do you think about this amateurism idea? And for the past 150 years, these athletes that bust their ass, I know I'm saying this very biasly, bust their ass, and they're like bringing all this cash to these universities. These athletes weren't able to get a dime from what they used in their name, image and likeness over the past 150 years.
Yeah, I mean, as an outsider coming from a country that does not have a culture of college sports anything like the US, it was very strange to come here, and like professional sports and college sports look like the same thing, essentially. Like I truly don't understand the difference. Except that some of the kids are in college and some of them are not anymore. So why, like you said, these kids bust their ass, and they're, you know, dedicating their entire lives to play this sport for their school. There's probably a whole lot of sacrifice going on and a whole lot of work that's not allowing them to go outside of school to find work and make a little money like a lot of other uni students might be able to do while they're at college. So why shouldn't they be able to capitalize on that? And at the end of the day, what is the difference between a college athlete and a professional athlete?
Yeah, it's where the money flows, I guess. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, because there's been situations, dozens and dozens of situations where, you know, you have, there was one the other day that I was reading where there was a guy, I think he played basketball for Michigan State, and it was like March Madness, so it's like the tournament, like leading into the Final Four, into the finals in college basketball, and this guy accepted a $40 dinner from like a booster or something like that. Like the booster picked up the check, and this guy got suspended for March Madness because a booster paid his bill. So that's what the NCAA has done over the past decades, right? When in terms of sanctions and stuff like that. And there's so many stories of like college football players going to like autograph signings, grabbing a couple $1,000s underneath the table and getting suspended. Their eligibility is being pulled, and they can't play the last 2 years of college football because they accepted a couple $1,000s.
Is it because the NCAA wants to be able to control all of the money coming in, or is there another good reason that it's been disallowed until now?
Yeah, I think it's easy to say that. Like, hey, they want to control the money, it's greed and all that. I think that might be a part of it, but I also think a huge part of it is also that when you start to throw money into things, everything gets a little bit weird, right? So, and I think I was talking to Emma about this the other day, but let's imagine that you have a kid, right? This kid's really good at football, and he grows up in Arizona. This kid turns 17, and you have a school from You have a school from Texas recruiting him. So it's, University of Texas is recruiting him. And then you have University of Wisconsin recruiting him. And both teams are really good. They're in good conferences, blah, blah, blah. But now this is thrown in. There's sponsors, right? There's people, like, let's say there's just the car dealership, because that's like the classic easy one. There's a car dealership. And the one in Texas says, hey, we're going to pay you $250,000 to put your face on the billboard. The one in Wisconsin says the exact same thing. Now that kid has to think about, Texas doesn't have state taxes. So not even considering what the hell I'm doing on the field and football and all that, they're two really good universities. Do I go to Texas because now I don't have to pay state taxes on the $250,000 that I'm taking in from this deal over the next 4 years? Or do I go to Wisconsin where I have to pay state taxes on the $250,000? That kid, your kid, you might tell your kid, hey, go to University of Texas because you're going to make more money, right? And that's just one really simple example. Now let's talk about, if the $250,000 in Texas wasn't offered at University of Wisconsin, there is no car dealership. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to Texas because they can take that $250,000 that they would have not gotten in Wisconsin. So recruiting is going to be weird. Decisions on where people go are going to be weird. There's already a discrepancy in money that universities have and their facilities and all that. That's already a recruiting upside that kids look at. It's like, oh, I want to go to this. I want to go to University of Alabama because their strength and conditioning facilities are unbelievable versus, some Division II school in California. California's on the East Coast, right? Because their facilities are trash. Now it's like I have to think about the coaching staff, the record, the conference, the facilities, the money that I can get going to that university because of the connections with boosters and all that. So it's going to get weird, but I think this is going to be extremely interesting to watch.
The other thing that comes to mind is just like what companies are offering up sponsorships and what are players allowed to accept, and is there going to be any guidelines over what they are and are not able to be sponsored by?
There can't be.
So what about like a cannabis company wants to sponsor an athlete, or an alcohol company if the athlete's over 21?
Yeah,
like that what happens there?
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things. It's like you can't, unless it's in, unless that has been told to that athlete before they went to that university. You can't just make up rules when these things come along. So that will be another consideration. What are the stipulations on what kind of money can I accept going to this university? So the NCAA was caught completely off guard. They lost this Supreme Court ruling and it just smashed them. They weren't ready for it. So the NCAA is like, we don't know what to do. Follow the state guidelines, what your state allows. And if your state doesn't have guidelines, universities just make up your own shit. So essentially, they're just saying, universities or states, please tell these athletes what they can or cannot do because we weren't ready for this. So athletes that are going to these universities just need to do some research and ensure that they align with that university's values and whatever that thing may be. But if that's not a rule, it's like, hey, just because I'm wearing a rock tequila, I don't know what his tequila company's called, because I'm wearing a rock tequila shirt doesn't mean that I'm drinking the tequila. I don't care if I'm 17 years old. The Rock's paying me $2 million.
Yeah, but young kids look at that and they totally think that person is.
Who cares?
True.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I think
it's not illegal
schools,
right now, for a kid to wear a Coors Light shirt. You know what I mean? Down the street. You know what I mean?
Are, at the end of the day, academic institutions that are trying to uphold, I think, some kind of a reputation. Maybe not. Maybe
Sorry,
it's different here.
That was really funny. Not when we're talking about athletics run it.
Yeah. Okay.
In this country, that's unfair. In Division I, Power 5 conference schools, athletics run the show. The football coaches or basketball coaches are making more than the university's president. That tells you a lot right there. You know what I mean? So, didn't mean to laugh at that. But if we're talking about some universities where, they don't have good athletic programs, they don't put any funding into that, their coach is making $80K a year. It's like, yeah, that might be the case. But in these really serious conferences and divisions around the country, ooh, sports are it. Sports bring the bread.
America is so weird. Love it. Don't get me wrong, but it's just so different than what I grew up with.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to hit that
Yeah.
extended a little further than I intended, but I think it's such an interesting thing, and I'm excited to see where this thing goes. And hey, we might be going to ASU and putting some OPEX shirts on some people.
There we go. Well, guys, if you have any thoughts about what Carl just proposed there, let us know in the comments below. Should we move on to some unilateral versus bilateral training?
Weird transition, but yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. I mean, the best way I think to transition in life is just to rip off the
Just to do
Band-Aid
it.
and go for it.
Yeah, let's roll.
That's my style. So I think what we're going to do is walk through a couple different training goals or dose responses that we're looking from training and just kind of figure out bilateral or unilateral. What is going to be better? Could each have some utility depending on who's in front of us and go from there. So let's start with absolute strength. I think that would be just like a nice logical starting point. So you have a client.
Well, before we jump into it.
Yeah.
Where do you stand? Not on like bilateral versus unilateral. We'll end it with that. But where do you stand on thought? Like what sparked this? Because this was actually your idea to have this conversation. What sparked it? Are you hearing a lot of these questions? Are you having these conversations? Are you thinking about it in your own head? Like where did this come from for you?
I was just in training. I have a lot of my best thoughts. No, I'm not going to call them that, but I have a lot of thoughts when I'm doing exercise, whether I'm like riding my bike or in the gym. I just like stew around ideas. And that's, I think we were talking about potential podcast topics in the gym, and I think I might have been doing some lunges, some reverse lunges off the riser.
You were, yeah, you were.
Yeah. And it got me thinking about bilateral versus unilateral training when you may or may not use one. But I think it's something I'm constantly thinking about as a coach. Anytime a client comes to me and I'm thinking about what is going in their A's, B's, and C's, like you have to make a conscious decision each time whether you want to choose a bilateral or a unilateral exercise, because they're so they're just going to produce a different result, right? There always has to be that deliberate choice in program design. You can't just slap random exercises on people and think you're going to get what you want from that training response. And I think, this conversation should cover some of that.
Cool. Fair enough. Yeah, I remember years and years ago, I looked at unilateral exercises as like higher order exercises because they weren't the way that I was brought up. They weren't done very often. And then I hit this like stage in training for myself. I think it was like after high school. Maybe I was in university. But that's when I really started to like really dig in. And I went way too far with like unilateral stuff, and we'll hit it at the end in preference. But that's where that idea came from, where I was like doing, A's through E's of unilateral work. And I'd look at my watch and I'm like, oh my God, I'm 3 hours in. But yeah, let's hit that at the end.
Cool. No, last note there was that I definitely had a bilateral bias in my training for a long time with CrossFit. And that like being what I was into in that world, there was not a lot of unilateral training that was coming there. So there was post CrossFit kind of a love affair with single arm and single leg work, just because I hadn't been exposed to it for a number of years, just based on the sport.
Yeah, CrossFit's using a lot of unilateral exercise selection these days.
It's
which
changed.
Is awesome to see. Yeah, it's really good to see.
Yeah.
Such a different dose response, and it challenges those people that did have that bilateral, more that bilateral bias in their training over the years. So it's been interesting to see, but they've adapted.
That dumbbell snatch started it all.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Yep.
All right, so let's talk absolute strength. So you have a client who comes to you and they want to get as strong as possible, right? Like they say to you, maybe I want to, build as much strength as I can. I don't know what I'm going for.
If you're listening, George is just like punching the air and flexing her bicep right now.
Trying to create a really intense response. They want to get super strong. So what are you choosing? Like what's the...
All things being equal.
Yep.
Whatever the hell that means. What does it? Okay, we'll get that. All things being equal, no discrepancies. We're all good. Someone wants to get as strong as possible. I think the easiest measure of that are bilateral exercises. When we look at absolute strength and we look at, historical context and, what we know to be true as strong, it's easier to say, a 300-pound deadlift for a female is very good, right? For most people, it's very easy to say a 400 squat for a male is very good for most people, right? So it's a lot easier to say that than it is to say, a 100-pound single arm dumbbell bench press at 30x1 for 8 reps per side is very good. Not because that's not like a good, measure of unilateral strength, but I think we just connect more to that bilateral, those bilateral exercises. And when we start to look at, just pure brute absolute strength, like we do measure that bilaterally, right? Like we think about like, are you going to go and push a car with one hand? Probably not. You're probably going to go and push that thing with all you got with 2 hands. So I think bilateral, all things being equal, is a better measure of absolute strength.
And if we talk about, when is that actually tested in sport, you look at powerlifting, and they're testing the squat, bench, and deadlift. They're not testing the single leg Romanian deadlift, single arm bench press, and rear foot elevated split squat. They've chosen those exercises for a reason, and ultimately intensity is going to be higher. Like what you can put on the barbell for a deadlift is always going to be heavier than what you can do in a single leg variation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's less there's less room for like weird scenarios of like someone having better stability, let's say like the single leg RDL, someone having better anterior tib stability, and that's why they were able to balance with the single leg RDL versus, hey, just go pick that thing up. It's like that person was just stronger, right? Yeah, you can say they have better stability in the midsection and all of that, but we would actually say that that's a great measure of absolute strength as well, is having great stability in the midsection. So I do think that there's less variables in the bilateral work to just be like, yeah, you're strong.
Definitely. It's not to say, though, that someone can't get stronger from doing unilateral work. Like, I think that's an important thing to emphasize. And it's possible that someone's, plateaued on their back squat. Like, they've been sitting at 350 for months or years, and they're just not seeing that go up. And then you go ahead and you test their rear foot elevated split squat, and they can only do 10% of their body weight per hand or something like that. And then you work on that split squat and bring that up, and that could ultimately end up helping them bump up that back squat plateau, right?
Yeah, I think if we look at just concepts of adaptation, what do we adapt to? We usually adapt to things that we haven't done before. Like we adapt to them quicker or more efficiently. So if we do take someone, that has a 350-pound back squat and they've plateaued on that, you can just say, hey, we're going to take some time away from bilateral squatting, and we're going to do some tough single leg work or unilateral work, or just like lunge pattern stuff. Keyword there being tough, right? Like it challenges them. So they're adapting to this thing and they're doing it on both sides. They're building a bunch of tonnage and volume and all of that. And then you bring them back to the back squat. And maybe there wasn't like an obvious discrepancy in like, glutes firing or hips and, knees going into valgus or anything like that. But they're just more stable and more strong after coming out of that very robust intensification cycle of single leg work, where they're just like, now I'm stronger in the back squat because each leg independently, each hip, each glute independently is now stronger. For most people, that will transfer to the back squat. If we're talking about like the top of the top and we're talking about 800-pound back squats, those people aren't going to 900 by doing single leg work. They need a back squat.
Yeah. Anything else to add there related to absolute strength?
No, I think just stake in the ground, I guess. I would look at bilateral work as a better measure.
Definitely. Okay, let's talk about discrepancies and when we're seeing differences in left to right, potentially, in assessment or maybe even in like some strength FME testing. So unilateral or bilateral? Where do we start?
Man, I'm going to go with unilateral here.
I think I support that choice, and maybe I set you up for that one.
Yeah. I think, the reason why it's so obvious in my own head is just because because if we're saying we have a discrepancy somewhere, when we start like tearing layers apart, it only makes sense to do one side at a time or like utilize unilateral work, right? Because if someone has a discrepancy, obviously we'd have to like identify what that discrepancy is first. But just as a whole, if someone has a bilateral discrepancy, to tear it apart, you probably want to look at each side independently and see where someone is. And when we start to identify those discrepancies, left to right, usually there is one, right? Like if a discrepancy is to be had, there is one left to right. and then you just implement strategies to clear up that discrepancy. And I think a very easy, low barrier one for a lot of people to use is if they find a discrepancy left to right, whether that's an external rotation test, a split squat test, like you said, if you're doing a single leg RDL test, whatever it is, it's like, okay, I have a discrepancy, which means that I'm stronger, more flexible, more stable, whatever the case is, on one leg or one arm over the other. Then you just train the one that's lagging and you match with the one that's not lagging, because you don't want to create more of a discrepancy. And when you think about how that's done in practice, it's very simple, right? It's like you test someone in their split squat and they're like, okay, I got 6 reps at 70 pounds with my right leg, and I got 8 reps at 70 pounds with my left leg. In training, you're like, okay, we're going to do dumbbell rear foot elevated split squats. I want you to start with your right leg, and whatever load you do and however many reps you do within this range, all you're going to do is you're going to match it with your left leg. So you're not trying to build up your left leg. You just want to make sure like no atrophy occurs, no like loss of patterning occurs, and you're really focusing on that right leg. And you do that for like 12 weeks, right? And then you retest that thing at the end of that 12 weeks, and you see what you implemented, if it works or not.
Yeah, definitely. Really important point there, though, would be to communicate that to your client and make sure they know to start with that side that's weaker or has an issue.
No, you just throw it.
No, but I've
I've
seen that, and I've also seen it as a question. When in the past I've made the mistake of not being really explicit about it, I see that come back as a question to me with single arm, single leg work. So just being really clear that you want them to start on the weaker or the non-dominant, whatever side. If needed, prescribe rest in the middle between sides, because you're going to get that question. So be explicit with people whether you want it or you don't, and make sure they know that if on that left side they can do 8 reps at 10 pounds on the power raise, and that left side is the issue, then on the right side they're doing 8 reps at 10 pounds as well. They're not going to try and do more.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Over communication has like been something I've really had to do with that.
Yeah. And I would say unilateral work in terms of identifying discrepancies or cleaning up discrepancies is, if we call assessment the truth, unilateral work is the fucking truth, right? Because it's like there's nowhere to hide from it. So just take someone, or even you in your own training, like imagine you jumping on a bench press and doing tough single arm dumbbell bench presses, and you're just like watching someone do that. You can identify some pretty good or obvious discrepancies by what they do with their offhand, right? Because I've been asked that question a few times by clients. It's like, yeah, this is pretty tough, but I don't really feel it that much in my chest. I can't actually balance my body on this bench press or on this bench because the load is just too heavy. So I have to like really make up for it I have to put this arm underneath the bench, or I have to like do this thing. And it's like, yeah, just try to, put that arm down and just relax with your left side and try to just use your right side. And a lot of people can't do that with one side or the other. And you'll usually find a discrepancy in the core. You'll find a discrepancy in even the lower body, interesting enough. But yeah, unilateral work it shows a lot of really cool things in terms of discrepancies with people.
Definitely.
Maybe not cool. That was probably a little bit I think it's cool. Fucking.
Yeah, that's okay. People are in pain and suffering, but we think it's cool.
That's cool.
Quick question on that one. So let's say someone has a limb out of commission. Maybe they have a broken arm or a broken leg, and they just can't train one side. Good time to do some unilateral training. No, seriously though, would you keep training the side they're capable of training while that other arm's out?
Yeah, and the reason is because there's a lot of transfer and carryover from one side to another. There's actually been research done on this. If you did strap one arm in a cast, and you're like, I'm only going to do dumbbell bench press with my right arm, and I'm going to do curls with my right arm, blah, blah, blah. It's like some of that muscle growth will actually extend to the other side or bleed over to the other side. You're not just going to have this like disgustingly atrophied left side and then this right side's going to be massive. You'll have it like where the cast is or what's being actually stabilized, but you won't have it across the entire upper body. So yeah, if someone's capable of training one side of the body and they're in that thing for an extended period of time, I definitely would train unilaterally with the limb that I could. If that limb was out of commission for a week, I would just take the entire week off of upper body. But if that was an extended time, and it's like, yeah, let's do some work on that side that we can do some work on.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else to add there on discrepancies?
Nope.
I mean, there's so many hundreds of thousands of examples that we could give there, but I don't think we need to Let's go into managing intensity and using unilateral versus bilateral training. If the goal is to manage intensity, maybe you have a master's athlete who just can't recover as well as they used to be able to. Maybe you have someone that has really stressed out life and they're just going through a tough period right now, and you're trying not to add a bunch of stress through training. What would be a useful tool here?
All right. So this, in my opinion, depends on the pattern that's being used,
Yep.
as well as the capabilities of the person. So I want to say, all things being equal, unilateral work, I would bias that if the goal is to manage intensity. But just imagine if you have someone that doing unilateral work is extremely challenging to them, cognitively even, right? Like imagine the person that when they get into a lunge and they do a couple reps, especially with load, they're just like completely wiped out because they had to concentrate so much and every single repetition needed so much effort. Maybe unilateral work to manage intensity isn't the best thing for that person. Maybe we're doing like, if we're just trying to get work in and just like go through some patterns, maybe we're choosing like open chain exercises and we're not biasing unilateral or bilateral. Maybe we're just looking somewhere else. But if they're capable of performing unilateral work and it's not super taxing on the nervous system, I would bias unilateral work for most people.
And the reason for that would be that ultimately the intensity is just lower.
For some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. For most people.
Yes.
For most people, intensity would be lower. But I've seen some freaks in unilateral work where they're like reverse lunging and split squatting more than they can back squat. So got to be careful there with some people, especially those like type 2 fiber people where it's just like they're just strong as hell unilaterally. But for most people, intensity will be lower unilaterally.
Yeah. I mean, Jacob, my husband, just gets completely blown up by single leg work and has a major distaste for it, and just feels like crap if he's given, B1, B2 of, call it like rear foot elevated split squats and then like single leg RDLs or something like that. Yep. He'll be miserable for days.
Ooh, that's a butt burner.
That is, isn't it? Gotta work on those glutes, the important things.
It's a biased program designed
Definitely.
by the wife there.
I mean, there's times where there's strategies you could use in bilateral training to manage intensity as well. If you do decide or you want to go with a squat or a deadlift or something more conventional like that. I mean, as coaches, we have tempo as a tool, for example. If we have a client that we don't want them to, hit their 5 RM today, we give them a, 3 down, 3 pause, 3 up,
yep.
1 at the top to be able to just bring intensity down. So that is another tool in there if we decide that bilateral training is a better option.
Yeah. And remember we talked about, this was some time ago, I think when we were talking about like hypertrophy and all that stuff, and like we wouldn't do the Zercher squat if the idea is, but that might be a good exercise selection if we want to manage intensity, put people in awkward odd object positions to manage intensity as well, and you could still do that bilaterally, get in some really good work, and because you're putting that barrier in, they actually can't lift a ton of load. So that's something that I've used quite often as well.
We found a use for the Zercher squat.
Yeah. I'm not a hater of the Zercher. I just don't want people doing Zercher squats to get bigger quads,
It's the example. It's the best example to use in that situation.
What do you think, Emma?
She's not sure.
Ooh, I caught her off guard.
Yeah.
That's good.
The one where it's in the elbows.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
she knows the Zercher.
Oh, yeah.
You've done decent amount of Zercher carries and stuff, right? Yeah, to fix that saggy scap, Zercher carries.
That's it.
Got it. Okay.
There we go. Let's talk motor control. So developing motor control.
Let's talk about that.
So probably a brand new trainee. So excited for motor control. Brand new trainee comes into your gym and you take him through the wonderful OPEX move assessment, and you guys go through, your squat, bend, push, pull, lunge, core assessments, and you see that they're just a train wreck and they don't know how to move their body through space.
Yes.
And it's a fail like across the board. They just total newbie, no efficiency in movement patterns whatsoever. Bilateral or unilateral training?
Ooh, man, this one is very pattern dependent,
Yeah,
right?
it
So
is.
when we think about someone that can't do an air squat, it's like, are we going to have them do single leg squats?
Obviously, pistol squats.
Yes,
answer,
exactly,
right?
Maybe we'll have them do some like step down stuff, some like Poliquin step up, stuff like that. But Yeah, I think it depends on the pattern, depends on the person, depends on if we're trying to clean up a discrepancy and that's why we're doing motor control, or we're just trying to like learn a pattern and that's why we're doing motor control. If it's the latter, if they're just trying to learn the pattern, I would actually bias bilateral because of the amount of time under tension and volume that's going to be needed in a session, right? So we just lay out like a A1, A2, B1, B2. Imagine if every single one of those exercises were unilateral exercises. That really quick and efficient training session just turned into 2 hours because we're not just doing A1, A2, B1, B2 times 4. We're doing that times 8 because we're doing 2 sets per set essentially. So it gets nuanced and a little bit weird there. But that doesn't mean that the entire A1 through B2 has to be unilateral. And that's where I hedge and I say it depends on the pattern that we're working on. For upper body movements, I bias unilateral if we're trying to build motor control or clean up a discrepancy. For lower body, I'd actually go the other way, because if someone doesn't have the ability to move through that pattern, they're not going to be able to pick a leg up off the ground and bend or squat. I know the lunge is a little bit different because that is unilateral because we're in that lunge stance. But yeah, for the bend and the squat, I would actually bias bilateral for people.
Yeah, when you add unilateral for those lower body patterns, it does add that entire core stability factor that they're going to have to organize their brain around. And obviously we want them to develop that over time, but like just focusing on 2 feet planted on the ground and not having to worry about balancing on 1 foot is probably a good starting point for people.
Yeah. And I think we have to think about people's function as well, right? It's like, how functional is it for this person to do a bunch of unilateral work versus this other person? We can think of like other examples or like specific examples. I like to use the waiter example because waiters usually do this, right? So it's like maybe for a waiter or a professional bartender, I was going to do a shake with like a thing. But that would have probably looked weird on camera. So I'm not going to do the bartender shake. You guys know what I mean. Maybe unilateral work for those individuals would be more appropriate. We look at someone like a contractor that's like, pushing things, pulling things, bending over, picking things up. Maybe bilateral work would be more appropriate based on their function. So I think that's the beauty of personalized fitness, when you look at the person and what that person really needs.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, brand new novice
Are you
in the
still
gym.
thinking about the shake?
Of course I am. I have the humor of an 11-year-old boy. Brand new person coming into the gym, if they develop motor control in their squat pattern and their bend pattern on 2 feet, it's probably, just don't look at me like that. It's going to have some positive carryover to unilateral exercises as well. For sure. Just beginner training age. On the unilateral stuff for upper body, I know a lot of the times it's just that like connection to understanding what it feels like to contract your lats and contract your biceps as you do a bicep curl, that people can have a really hard time with, and it limits them in the movement pattern because they just don't know what they're meant to be feeling. So it can be a great time to use unilateral exercises because, okay, now instead of thinking about contracting my biceps with 2 arms, I can just focus on the 1 arm at a time. I just did this.
Fell for it. As long as I'm not doing it, I think it's okay if you do it. Well,
I don't know if it is. I think it might be worse.
Yeah, that's true.
Guys, this is just taking a turn this episode.
Yeah. But let me get us back on track. I do think single arm cable exercises are extremely underrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like single arm cable exercises. You're still laughing. Yeah, she can't lose this. I don't know what's happening.
I'm fine.
We may need to take a break. No, we're good.
We got this. We're professionals, guys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is the rustiness of being off for a couple weeks. She can't take my humor anymore. I'm actually too funny.
You got funnier.
Yeah.
You took a break and you got funnier.
But anyway, single arm cable exercises are extremely underrated. And even like single arm machine exercises, like locked in place machine exercises relative to motor control. Because when we think about individuals having a lack of motor control, usually it's because they've never actually created tension in that musculature. And I know we break things down in patterns, but we can go deeper than that, right? Like we do all the time where it's like pull. Well, we're talking about elbow flexion in the pull, or push. specifically we're talking about elbow extension. Like people may not have a bunch of experience doing this with their elbow with tension and control.
We're good.
Oh man, I was doing an elbow flexion thing. I should have done the bicep curl. That would have been less funny for Georgia. No, but I think those are extremely underrated.
Definitely. I think we should just move on to muscle endurance, which is our last.
We'll keep this one lower body specific.
I don't know
muscle
if that's
endurance.
better. Okay, so muscle endurance is the goal. We're choosing bilateral or unilateral?
For muscle endurance, efficacy wise, and like what we need to do to build muscle endurance, it has to be bilateral, except if we're talking about the lunge pattern, obviously.
Yes.
But yeah, and the reason why I say that is just because there's a lot of, when we start looking at like basics of building muscle endurance and what's happening in the system, the goal is to build fatigue fast, right? And to like you're training to push that fatigue to the right a little bit. So if we're doing that with the right arm, and then we go and we do that with the left arm, it's like we're losing some muscle endurance opportunity, if that makes sense, right? So for muscle endurance, it's just more efficient to train muscle endurance bilaterally, unless you're looking at a very specific case of like someone having to have muscle endurance in a single arm dumbbell snatch, right? It's like, okay, maybe we do start to build some unilaterally in that situation.
Why does someone need muscle endurance?
Yeah, I mean that's dependent on who they are and you know what they're building that muscle endurance for. I think the easy one is like fitness, right? And like fitness for a sport. I think that's like the easiest one to like imagine and see and connect to. But when we look at strength endurance and just getting really strong and pushing that out to the right, I think muscle endurance or strength endurance, that's very beneficial for everyone to train eventually when they're capable of training it.
Yeah, thank you.
So everyone.
Good
everyone.
answer. I like it. Unilateral versus bilateral. Anything to add on the goals that we just walked through?
No.
So, what is your choice overall? Bilateral or unilateral? If you could only do one, what would it be?
Ooh, if I could only do one, what would it be? We talked about this briefly yesterday.
And I think we disagreed, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we did. I don't know if I changed my mind, though. I thought about it a little bit last night. You go first.
I'm like, actually have forgotten what I said yesterday, but I think I said unilateral, right?
You said unilateral.
Yeah, I would go unilateral. It's a little bit selfish, but I just have some like left to right stuff that I like to be able to deal with, and I do better when I have unilateral work in my training because of that. So if unilateral is all I have to prescribe to myself and my clients, then I'm choosing what's best for me. And I'm going with unilateral training.
I'm going to stick to my guns. So I did say bilateral yesterday,
Yep.
and my reason still stands with the efficiency of a training session
Yep.
and being able to like get in and get out. Just that A1 through B2 example that I laid out earlier. Imagine that being A1 through C2, right? Like that's a very, very long training session. So all things being equal, if someone's capable of doing bilateral work, I would prefer bilateral over unilateral if I had to choose one. But good thing we live in this great world where we can choose both. So I'll use both.
Yes, freedom. Follow-up question. Barbells or dumbbells?
We disagreed on this as well.
We did.
Dumbbells.
Yeah.
Yeah, dumbbells. And this is considering, this is with the consideration that I have whatever loads I need for myself and the people that I coach in dumbbells. So it's like, 2.5 pounds all the way up to like 150 pounds in dumbbells with increments of 5, right? So I would definitely go dumbbells over barbells.
I went barbells based on my experience during lockdown. I took a barbell and a set of plates home, and I had a great time barbell lifting on my front patio. And I was a little worried about the unilateral work at first, but found ways to push and pull single arm, single leg with a barbell. And I just hate gripping dumbbells. Like the idea that I would have to like hold and grip dumbbells every day for training makes me a little bit sad. I'd like to be able to put a bar on my back.
Oh, man.
So
I think you have some.
I need stronger grips.
Yeah.
I probably would benefit from it.
Yeah.
But I just don't want to.
Just that statement just tells us that you need to do more dumbbell work.
I guess I do.
Especially for your craft, your BJJ.
This is it. This is it. I need those
grab,
iron grips.
Grab people. Throw those people. You know what I mean? You don't want to be like, you slipped out of my hand.
I don't do that shit. I have strong grips, man. Well, guys, leave us a comment if you're on YouTube and let us know if you prefer unilateral or bilateral training and why. We're very curious to know. As always, if you're on audio, we love reviews, so please leave us a review and let us know if you enjoyed our conversation today. And if you didn't, then lie to us. We would appreciate that.
Or just tell the truth. Let us know.
That too. Be honest, guys.
It's good to be humbled every now and again.
It definitely is.
It's good for people to
Appreciate
give
feedback.
some good criticism.
Definitely.
When needed.
It helps us grow.
Just push it toward Georgia, not me. I can't handle it.
He's pretty weak. Last point, guys, is just remember that we are opening enrollment for our CCP cohort. When this goes live, we will be open for that October group. So if you want to get in, if you want to make sure you secure your textbooks, because we will have a limited number, please make sure you head to opexfit.com, go apply to CCP, and we'll have a chat.
Last cohort of the year, right?
Yeah, last cohort
That's
of
it.
the year.
Last chance.
Do it, guys.
See you guys.